You should have seen it, it was screaming all this time. I was alone, a rolling stone, I couldn't see you in the light. You were hiding, I was blinding like a lightning in my sky. And I have been waiting all this time. Till I know it didn't lose you just in time. I so far on the road, but baby, on my finish line.
Is this the time we usually wake up?
Hey, what a feeling, what a reason to believe in being alive.
I just wanted to start
I've been waiting all this time.
scalable applications on cloud computing platforms. My name is Alex Williams. I'm publisher of the News Stack, and this is what we write about pretty much more than anything else, is cloud native computing. We were there before the CNCF came up with the term, talking about the container world, in Docker in particular. And it just makes me think about Docker. I always think about Docker when I think about cloud native, because I think about how focused they were on trying to really be expressive. And that's a term I've been hearing over the past few days when I'm chatting with people, is this expressiveness, this desire for the developer experience. And I think that affects everyone, whether you're in operations or in front-end developer. So I wanted to ask a quick question, and maybe you can just raise your hand. How many people would describe themselves as developers? Raise your hand. How many people would describe you as operations people? All right, a few. DevOps. Yeah, okay, that's good to know. All right, let's get started. A little housekeeping. The sessions are, each session is 30 minutes, 25 minutes for the talk and 5 minutes for your questions. We have 6 talks today, and our last speaker sent a recording of his talk. Unfortunately, he could not make it to the conference today due to illness. I will just remind you that you can ask the questions at the very end just by raising your hand, or you can use the app, and we'll be following the questions that come in through the application, the Infobip Shift application. So why don't we get started? And our first discussion is on the end of localhost. And I have another question. How many people here develop on their local machines? Okay. Would you consider a cloud-based IDE? I don't know. Okay. So Shawn Wang is head of DX at Airbyte, and he's
here, and I'm here in a totally different capacity. talking about my most viral tweet of the year. So let's get started. So this is the end of Localhost. It is a thesis. I'm not here to try to sell you on it. I'm just trying to explain it. But I think it is very apt for the cloud native stage, because this is essentially the start of cloud native coding. We think about the origin of computers, computing history in the 60s and 70s. We were coding with mainframes. We really used to have these terminals that would connect to a mainframe, and we would timeshare between them. But then with the rise of the personal computer, we then had our own machines, and that was a huge revolution over the past 30 years. The thing with cloud is that cloud is now more powerful than our own machines, just definitionally. And what we're going to explore here is the implication that it might bring to our development workflow. I saw in the poll that we did earlier, thanks to Alex, most of you are developers. You really care about this. That's why you're here. That's why we're standing room only. I'm so sorry. I wish we had more chairs, but I'll make this worth your while. So we have a very quick agenda today. We have 3 sections. I'm going to go really quickly. I just realized I don't have a timer here. So can anyone keep me on time, just roughly? Okay. All right. Thank you. So we'll go over some stories from a personal development. We'll go over like the basic facts about the end of Localhost, and then finally we'll go over what's out there. What's fun is, usually as a speaker, usually as a dev advocate, I'm here to. I usually have I work for a company that's involved in one of these spaces. I am not that. I'm not here to sell you anything today. I'm just here to show you all the research I've done, because this is such a huge topic of conversation. All right, so first story comes from my first job, and really my exploration about development. When in the beginning, we were doing local dev for front end and back end. Iteration was fast. You can just reload and make changes and see them reflected on your laptop. But then when we moved the back end to cloud, that starts to become very slow, and that's what I experienced when I was first embracing serverless, right? I was trying to deploy stuff in serverless, and I didn't really have a local MOC, so every single time I deployed, I had to wait for a few minutes for the new function to get loaded again. So that iteration speed was much slower, and that would actually hurt my productivity. So I used to work at Netlify, and at Netlify, I was the maintainer of Netlify Lambda, which was a local MOC for our cloud serverless functions. It's not really displaying here for some reason. Oh, there we go. Okay, so this is the README. It's so complicated to set up. And I wrote that. And I feel a little apologetic. Even when you set it up for Create React App or Gatsby or whatever, you would have to configure some kind of weird proxy. The README just says, trust me, don't worry about it, just copy paste this code, you're fine. And then it works. And then there was all these other features that were just not supported. So there was just a lot of problems that ultimately we felt needed a more comprehensive solution. So then, modern problems require modern solutions. We'll make our server bigger, right? That will solve it. So then I worked on Netlify Dev and Netlify CLI, and that basically we took our routing engine, which was written in C++, compiled it to WebAssembly, shipped it to NPM, let you download it on your local machine, and then you can run our production routing solution on your local machine. It got really good upvotes on Hacker News. We built in a whole bunch of functionality that was missing from the previous solution in there. But then it still wasn't enough. There were all these other features that we still couldn't replicate locally as compared to our cloud service. And basically, this is all this on the right is Netlify background functions, Netlify scheduled functions, and Netlify edge functions. All were shipped after the initial launch of Netlify Dev and not reflected in Netlify Dev because, surprise, surprise, we want to ship features on the cloud service, and then you have to ship it again on the CLI. It just is, you're always behind. You're always having to double your engineering resources to support this kind of workflow. So what we ended up with is we have kind of fast local and local dev, but then it's incomplete. It's buggy sometimes. It causes you to have to debug differences between dev and prod. That's my first story. The second story is when I went from serverless computing stuff, I moved to AWS, and I started looking into more of their database and stateful offerings. Right? I worked at AWS Amplify. Amplify had some kind of DynamoDB and AppSync offering. This one has AWS Cognito for identity and S3 for file uploads. Again, every time, this is me on the live stream. This is my most embarrassing live stream ever. 4 hours of me trying to debug all of this stuff. And none of it could be done locally because I was always trying to update the cloud resources. CloudFormation takes a long time. So what do? It's the same playbook. We take the cloud solution and then we do a local mock of it, right? I have an API mock, I have a storage mock, I have a function mock. I just throw engineers at the problem. But then there's more problems, right? Like I need to replicate my database, I need to seed my database, I need to strip out private PII information, identifying information to code against when I develop my app. All of this is a routine, an accepted standard practice of how we code apps today against production data. But how much of this is actually necessary? Like, shouldn't someone take care of this for me? Third story, I don't have as much to show you because it was my previous job. It was at Temporal. So I moved from serverless to AWS to Temporal, where I started working on distributed systems and large clusters of code. We're all familiar with this meme from Docker, about Docker, where if it works on your machine, but it doesn't work in prod, then we just ship your machine, right? Falls apart when you start working with very large clusters of microservices, right? We're all familiar with the microservices dev stars of the big codes. I wasn't working on that kind of system, but it was definitely more than could be supported on one machine. And then what? So this is the kind of stuff I had to deal with. A basic Helm chart with Temporal got you Cassandra, Elasticsearch, Prometheus, Grafana all in one machine. And of course, you can't really run it with Kubernetes. You have to run it with like Minikube, which is kind of like a facsimile of Kubernetes. There's all this stuff. And then you go into environment issues, right? Like, do you have the right version of Go? Do you have the right version of Ruby? Whatever. Do you have the right certs? I had to set up MTLS certs. There's all these discrepancies that you have to get started on your local device just to get going with Temporal. And I felt a lot of developer experience sort of frustration, right? I was theoretically head of developer experience, and I couldn't do a thing about this. So very frustrating. There was 3 stories very quickly told. I always think about, in terms of quotes, Bob Metcalf, the same guy from Metcalfe's Law, he actually has another quote, which is super interesting. The browser reduces operating systems to a poorly debugged set of device drivers. In other words, if you ship a web app, it will run on any device more smoothly than a native app. That's definitely why the web has won on the desktop. So my version is the cloud has reduced the dev machine to a poorly debugged set of environment mocks, right? You will always, 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 always be behind. No matter what you do with cloud. The moment you touch cloud, the cloud is a moving target, your local mocks will fall behind. So I'm going to do a little survey. If you ever worked on a system too big for one machine, give me one clap. No, okay. If you have ever had code worked in dev but errored in prod, give me 2 claps. Nice. If you ever written if localhost do something, if not localhost do another thing, 3 claps. So like, what if all of this was not necessary, right? What if all of that was tech debt? Like basically the if localhost thing is tech debt from the day you write it. And it basically should be subsumed, is my argument, into a general part of the cloud norm. So that's the end of story time. We're going to cover where people are at today. So first, the big codes. When I first really tweeted this out, I didn't really expect a response. So I tweeted out, there's a very real possibility that local dev may be dead in 10 years. I had examples from PlanetScale, StackBlitz, and GitHub. And the response was huge. 600,000 people saw it. And there was just a lot of discussion back and forth, including just on different parts of Twitter. People hated it. People just, you can pry localhost from my cold, dead hands, right? Another one, out of my cold, dead hands. People really like their cold, dead hands. Just warm them up, I guess. But I think the sentiment is fair. Like, computers should be yours. You should be able to do whatever you want with it. Dan Abramov also thought I was wrong, but wrong in the other way. I said 10 years, he said 5. Which is super interesting. Guillermo Rauch, which is another guy I look up to, actually tweeted, he's been coding on an iPad since 2020. No MacBook, just iPad, because the iPad is just a thin client to all the services that he's running. Very, very interesting. People worried about latency, haven't you heard about the speed of light? Like when I type, I need to stay in flow. Every single key press, doesn't need to make a round trip to the server, blah, blah, blah. But really, like, all these latency questions, forget that there's so much of our workflow that's already on the cloud. We'll talk about that later. Jana Dogan, who is a pretty senior person, formerly at AWS, now at GitHub, says, yeah, I haven't set up a local environment at GitHub. Everything is in the browser now. Eric Bernhardsen, who's a very popular data scientist, expecting everything will go away. So that's going to bring it to like big codes. At Google, they have Google Cider. Facebook, they have Facebook On Demand. And GitHub, all of GitHub's engineering team moved to code spaces last year. Very, very huge move. They committed the entire engineering team to not use localhost, which is pretty cool. So every time I say that kind of stuff, it works for big codes, but not for me, right? Like that is the concern. And that's the question that I have to address now, right? Which is like from first principles, why should it work for you, independent of what the big people say? And really, I want to just offer this little descript thing. I hope the sound works. Let's just try it.
So we don't believe long-term that local development is going to exist in the future. It's partly because the world is moving to SaaS, and like if you've got a highly distributed environment, like it gets very tough to copy that onto your like laptop, right? And we've all done that. It gets out of date. You don't have Firebase locally, right? So we've come up with a concept, and we were the first to.
So that was the former VP of engineering at GitHub, now CEO of PlanetScale, saying that they don't believe in localhost. It's a huge, huge statement coming from someone who sells to developers. All of you use your local dev environments. I spent 2 years working on a local dev environment, and now I'm being told that's not part of the future. I think it's a pretty large statement, and that actually got me to start this talk, start this tweet, everything, right? And then he goes into his solution, which I thought was pretty interesting as well, from a database vendor.
Come out with this is data branching. So we basically allow you to branch your database as trivial and easy as you branch your code base. We believe as soon as you make that Git branch, you should immediately be able to make a database branch that you can connect to it. And that has multiple benefits. It's isolated. You can keep your own data in there. You can keep a different copy of the schema. You can do whatever. And rather than managing multiple versions of the database, if you switch between different environments, then you're tearing down, seeding, messing around with the database. That's cumbersome and annoying. Always breaks. So we believe in staging and development environments being in the cloud, and you can use that with like code spaces. So you get a GitHub branch. If you want to make schema changes.
Yeah. So sorry, I cut it off there. But to me, being familiar with Netlify, Vercel, Heroku, it's kind of like having Git branches for your database and not just for your code. And that opens up a whole range of possibilities. What if every single PR had its own custom copy of your data to work against, right? Including if you're making schema changes. That takes a lot of effort to figure out, but they've actually started to do it. I think that is the state of technology today, and it's super exciting. All right, so let's keep going. More reasons. More reasons you want to have. You might want to have cloud development. You might want to bootstrap your new machine. One of the most interesting facts I've ever found was at Netflix. They have a team entirely dedicated to sort of writing custom software to bootstrap your machine. Same at Spotify. And you wouldn't really think like that's a thing that happens enough, but if you hire like tens of thousands of engineers, it starts to add up. But also, when you lose a machine, when you change machines and you upgrade machines, you always want a way to sort of set it up in a professional manner. Sometimes you have the need to get more power, right? Than's available to you on your desktop. One of the more interesting replies to my tweet was someone from Tesla. Tesla moved to cloud coding because they were working on the sort of the car OS, and that was a much more beefy machine than their laptop was able to. If you use any SaaS services, they're not going to be available locally as well. And then finally, this is less exciting for developers, but companies want to control what you do with their company assets, so they want to lock down the dev security as well. Kelsey Hightower says, remote dev environments are trending. So I think he really nailed it. Process of writing software has become so complex that 10 cores, 64 gigs of RAM, I have a top-of-the-line MacBook, doesn't matter, still more than I can handle. But there's also a growing number of external dependencies, and there's just no way to handle it all on your local machine, because you're always going to be behind. So I think that's rather convincing, but I'm going to give you one more, which is this concept of the outer versus the inner loop. It may be old news to some of you, but it was news to me, so I'm just going to share a little bit about what this means, right? There's an inner dev loop and there's an outer dev loop. Inner dev loop, just editing code, running tests, previewing the code, whatever. This is everything that happens between commits. Outer dev loop is everything that happens after a commit, or sorry. After a commit, you kick off your CI/CD, you review your code, you build an image, whatever you do, that's after a commit. And the argument really is that the outer dev loop has already been given over to cloud, right? If you use Jenkins, if you use any sort of CI/CD, Circle CI, whatever, you're already giving that over to cloud. If you use GitHub, you're checking your code in, you're already giving that over to cloud. Really, the inner dev loop is now at the base of our contention, right? I'm sorry, this screen is just kind of, I'm seeing some artifacts. Anyway, so there's a question of whether our inner dev loop can withstand or is worth moving to the cloud. There's a latency question, right? But nobody complained when we moved Outlook to Gmail. Nobody complained when we moved Netflix from disk to streaming video. Nobody complained when we moved Photoshop to Figma. We're even moving gaming to streaming as well. There's also another startup, Mighty, that's moving Chrome browsers to the cloud as well. So you don't run Chrome locally. Some remote server runs it for you. It's a wacky concept. But all in the pursuit of better performance and more possibilities, the stuff that I already mentioned there. Okay, miscellaneous concerns. Independence. I need to be self-sufficient. I need to code on the plane. I need to code on the train. The long arc of history shows that the majority of people like to give up that independence for convenience, right? Like we're not self-sufficient in food, water, electricity, and probably in a lot of our internet services as well. Personal choice. I wanted to customize all my things. We are working that out. GitHub has settings sync. And others, I just put in this others bracket, like the stuff that is interesting, that is worth thinking about. SourceGraph is a huge startup, entirely premised on the fact that they can search your code faster than you can search it locally. That's a fascinating concept. GitHub Copilot, it can sort of suggest code to you. They're running a large language model just for you. And the latency, there is some latency, but it's actually helping a lot of people to code as well. That is all increasingly part of the inner dev loop. So that's the world as it is today. What does it mean for us? So what kind of solutions are being available for us? I think that's a big part of how technology diffuses, right? It's developed at BigCos to solve BigCo needs, and then people leave BigCos and then start each of these individual startups to offer them to the rest of us. I think there are three main categories that I like to think about. One is coding in the browser. There's Gitpod, which I use a lot for basically just doing deploy previews of stuff. But also there's Code Anywhere by Ivan. Code Sandbox, Eve is probably here. I know you were here last year. Stacklets, Replit, Coder. They all have different approaches, and I think they're worth trying out for their specific use cases. But you can see the power growing every single year. When Stacklets came up with web containers, being able to run it Node.js in the browser, that was a huge game changer for me. They're going to gain the ability, because of WebAssembly, they're going to gain the ability to run other languages as well. And that's just such a huge milestone, because now you can just run REPLs of full stack projects, not just front-end only projects. There's remote servers connecting to local editors. So you keep your local editor, whatever, VS Code, whatever, but then you connect. Oh, this is not showing. Oh, Jesus. I'm so sorry. Everything's showing on my screen, but sometimes I have to move my mouse for this to refresh. Okay, so you're connecting to a local machine, to a remote machine, right? That's being run and persisted for you. And then finally, there's branching environments. This is kind of like the newest set of this sort of up-and-coming solutions. The two that I have in mind are PlanetScale, which we talked about the branching already, and Railway, where they have ephemeral environments. I think Flight Control, I don't know if you guys are here, also have some kind of way to fork environments and spin them up ephemerally. But really, I think it has to be throwaway. Like you should, I think a lot of times we're very used to, let's say, one production environment, one staging environment, maybe one UAT environment, and that's it. Those are still pets to me. You should have 100 if you want. You should be able to spin up and then just go, I changed my mind, I'm going to spin it down again. It should be that cheap as setting up a new Git branch, right? That is true commoditization. So all this comes with a warning, right? All these solutions are still not good enough, right? The latency of some of the stuff that I mentioned, like, it's still not quite great. Like, it still doesn't really supersede the experience of the local dev environment. We all know that. but it's getting better, it's trending better. I think it's the time to start talking about it. Database branching, also still very new. There's some other vendors that are really making it part of a priority because of planet scale. But again, like databases are only part of a general part of your environment. There are other people who think, instead of moving all your compute to the cloud, maybe we bring the cloud closer to you, and there's a contingent of people who rather bet on edge compute. And all of this obviously is subject to new privacy and security concerns, right? At some point you will be hacked. Any of these services will be hacked. You have to have your security model resist that. I think what we need for this to work between vendors is an LSP for environments. So LSP, for those who don't know, is the Language Server Protocol, is what the TypeScript team at Microsoft has worked on to make basically the language plugins work for every single editor, right? Like, so they're not just writing the VS Code plugin for JavaScript, VS Code plugin for Python, and then everyone else running their own things. There's a common interface that has been standardized that every single editor now uses. So now when you add a new language, you just add it to the LSP. Now every editor benefits. I think we need that for environment branching, essentially. A common protocol where we say, all right, we're kicking off a new branch. Let's branch all of these environments through all the SaaS providers that I'm using. And I think that's the only way that we get to here. I don't know how to do this, but I think eventually, if this is going to happen smoothly, we're going to evolve something like this. So that's the agenda. We've covered a lot. I just want to leave you with something, right? Like Git is only 15 years old-ish. There was a time before Git. As central as it is to our development workflow today, there used to be a time when professional programmers just checked code in like, I don't know, barbarians, right? Like, the way that we work isn't set in stone. It can improve, and even if Git was designed for like Linux kernel development, most of us, even if we're developing solo projects, we still use Git today. I think that's how we should think about environment branching, just like Git branching. What can we do with that as it becomes more of a mature technology? So we're just at the beginning of this. I'm super excited about it. I want to leave you with one last meme, because I have to. So in cloud development, if it works locally but not in the cloud, we're just going to make you work in the cloud. And that's how remote development was born. So thank you very much. If you want to see the full essay, you can go on to DX Tips. Thank you.
Great. Do you have any questions for Shawn? Yeah.
How do you view this working in emerging markets that don't always have online capabilities?
Okay, so my microphone is off. Yeah, so the question was, how do I view this working in emerging markets where the people are not as online? The future is usually here, but it's not evenly distributed, right? So it usually starts out in rich countries, and then it goes into emerging countries. So just wait. That's really it.
Oh, boy. I see one way in the back.
Have you tried Stacklets?
I need to run the whole Electron thing, like the whole Electron browser.
Yeah, okay. So the question is, can we run Electron in a browser? Probably not. But then also there's, Tori is up and coming as a replacement for Electron. Maybe you want to try Tori. Again, like I said, like there's a lot that is rough, right? That we're still working it out. All we have to do though is watch the water slowly boil in this way, and look at how many people are independently arriving at the same conclusions. So if the technology is not good enough today, either build it or wait. I feel like I'm just saying that a lot. Anyone online, Alex? Oh, there's one more.
I haven't seen anyone online yet. Question?
Yes. So, how does working through online IDs help with the deployment cycle through AWS? It's no speedier than uploading from Airbyte.
Yeah. So the question is, how does working online on an online IDE help with deployment through AWS? It doesn't really. It has to be more tightly integrated than that to really see the benefit. And I think AWS isn't really trying to innovate there. You can check out, both Netlify and Vercel have some kind of live deploy reload thing. I think that's probably a glimpse into the future, but you need very tight integration into the frameworks that I don't think has been fully worked out yet. So no, you don't get that that ideal dream that you want. Like, we all have an ideal, right? Like, of like, I make the thing, it's instantly deployed out there. We know where the future is going to be. We know where we want it to go. We just need to see like how things trend there and maybe help build that future.
Any other questions? Do I see any? I'm going to scan the audience.
Before I go, I'm going to take a little selfie.
Oh, yeah, do that. No questions, anything at all, no? Okay, let's do the selfie.
Yeah, well, if you guys don't mind, wait for the camera. Hi! Thank you. Well,